As a freshman college student, I was working part-time as a delivery driver. One hot summer evening, I got a late-night delivery to a remote campsite. I was tired and just wanted to finish my shift and go home, but I was also motivated by the extra hours earnings. The GPS led me deep into the woods, and as I drove, my cell service cut out. Luckily, because my phone battery was also low, I wrote the directions on a piece of paper before starting to drive. The moon was shining through the sparse trees, casting long, creepy shadows over the road. Everything felt eerie and wrong, but I told myself to man up and tried to ignore the images running through my imagination. I finally arrived at the campsite the delivery was ordered to, but something felt off. It was eerily empty, with only a few tents pitched and a bonfire smoldering. I called out, "Hello, your food's here," but no one answered. The silence was unsettling. I left the food on a picnic table and started walking back to my car, feeling a knot of unease in my stomach. As I walked, I heard rustling in the bushes. My heart started pounding. Then, faint whispers seemed to float on the air. I looked around, but all I could see were the dark shapes of trees. My imagination went wild, picturing all sorts of creepy things lurking in the shadows. I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the safety of my car. When I finally got to my car, I jumped in and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I tried to start the engine. The car wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but nothing happened. Panic set in as I realized I was stranded in the middle of the woods, with no cell service and strange noises all around me. I was still trying to start the car when I saw them. A group of guys in dark cloaks was emerging from the woods, moving slowly towards me. My heart pounded in my chest. I quickly locked the doors and grabbed my phone, holding it up at every angle, desperate for a signal. Nothing. I was trapped. The men reached my car, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. One of them came up to the passenger side window and stared at me. His eyes were cold and menacing. Without warning, he smashed the window with a heavy object. Shards of glass flew everywhere, and I screamed. He reached through the broken window, trying to unlock the door. I acted on instinct and bit down hard on his arm. He yanked it back with a scream of pain. "You bitch," he yelled. My heart was racing and my mind was in a frenzy, trying to figure out what to do next. Another guy climbed in through the back window, grabbing me by the shoulders. He was strong, and despite my struggles, he pulled me out of the front seat and through the shattered glass. I felt the sharp pieces cutting into my arms and legs, but I couldn't stop fighting. Outside the car, they threw me to the ground. The rough dirt and sharp rocks dug into my skin. The group of guys surrounded me, their faces still hidden by their cloaks. One of them stepped forward and said, "Sorry, but you're needed for our initiation. It's nothing personal." He pushed one of the other guys towards me and told him to do it. The guy started undoing his pants. I screamed, and another guy put his hand over my mouth. I was terrified, my mind racing with the horror of what they were about to do to me. I couldn't believe this was happening. Just as I closed my eyes, thinking I was going to have to ensure the unimaginable, a loud roar pierced the air. A massive bear came charging out of the woods, its eyes fixed on us. The bear pounced on one of the guys, pinning him to the ground. Panic spread through the group, and they scattered in all directions, screaming in fear. The bear's roar echoed through the trees as it attacked, and I used the chaos to my advantage. Ignoring the pain from my cuts, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back, just focused on getting away. I cut diagonally through the woods, pushing through branches and stumbling over roots. My lungs burned, but I kept going, desperate to reach the road. Just as I finally did reach the road, I saw headlights appearing in the distance heading my way. I waved frantically, and a car stopped. The couple inside looked concerned as they saw my cuts and bruises. They helped me into the back seat and asked what had happened. I was too shaken to explain much, just mumbling about the attack. They drove me to the nearest hospital, and I tried to calm down, knowing I was finally safe. At the hospital, the nurses and doctors treated my wounds. I had cuts on my arms and legs from the glass, and they carefully cleaned and bandaged them. The pain was sharp, but I was just grateful to be alive. As they worked, the police arrived to take my statement. I told them everything, from the creepy campsite to the cloaked figures and the bear. The police seemed shocked and promised to investigate. They asked me for every detail I could remember, and I tried my best to give them all the information. I was still in disbelief that this had actually happened. The hospital staff and police were kind and supportive, making me feel a bit more at ease. Even though I was physically healing, the memories of that night stayed with me. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. My parents were horrified when they found out and insisted I take some time off from work to recover. They were supportive, and I felt lucky to have them by my side. A few months later, I moved to the other side of the country to further my studies in law. The experience had changed me. I felt more determined than ever to make a difference. I channeled my terrifying experience into my education, specializing in criminal law. I wanted to focus on cases involving violent groups and sick practices, like the ones I had encountered. The ordeal became a driving force in my career. I was motivated to fight for justice and protect others from similar horrors. I knew firsthand the fear and pain that victims went through, and I wanted to be their voice. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of purpose that kept me going. My experience in those woods was something I would never forget. But it also shaped me into someone stronger and more determined. I was no longer just a delivery driver. I was someone who had faced danger and come out the other side, ready to make a difference in the world. My name is Jason, and I work as a delivery driver. One night I got an order to deliver food to an old abandoned motel on the outskirts of town. The tip promised was unusually high, so even though I was skeptical, I decided to take it. Money was tight, and I figured it was worth the risk for some extra cash. It was a quiet, moonless night, and the streets were eerily empty as I drove towards the motel. The GPS guided me through narrow, winding roads that seemed to stretch on forever. I felt a chill in the air despite it being a summer night. My headlights cut through the darkness, but everything around me was pitch black. No streetlights, no other cars, just an endless road. As I drove, I kept thinking about the motel. I had heard stories about it being haunted, but I never believed in that sort of thing. Still, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the dilapidated building in the distance. It looked even worse than I had imagined. The motel seemed like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up, and the walls were covered in graffiti. Weeds had taken over the parking lot, and the whole place had an air of decay. The sign that once read "Welcome" was now barely readable, with letters missing and paint peeling off. I hesitated, wondering if this was some kind of prank, but the promise of extra money pushed me forward. I parked my car and took a deep breath. The silence was deafening, and I could hear my own heartbeat. I grabbed the bag of food and walked to the front desk area, where a single dim light flickered. The light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the graffiti look even more sinister. I called out, "Hello? Your food's here." But my voice seemed to disappear into the emptiness. As I stood there waiting for a response, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. This was no ordinary delivery, and I was beginning to regret taking it. I called out again, "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty halls, bouncing off the cracked walls and disappearing into the darkness. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, a raspy voice from the back office responded, "Leave the food on the counter." The voice sounded urgent, almost desperate. I strained my eyes, trying to see who was speaking, but the office was shrouded in shadows. I set the food down on the dusty counter just as I was told. My hands were shaking a bit, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The whole place felt wrong, like it was trapped in a time warp where everything was stuck in decay. Just as I turned to leave, I heard strange noises coming from the upstairs rooms. It started with a slow, rhythmic creaking of doors, like they were being pushed open and shut by an invisible hand. Then, faint crying drifted down the staircase, soft and sorrowful. Muffled voices followed, their words indistinguishable but filled with a sense of urgency and despair. I felt a shiver and every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but my curiosity got the best of me. I knew it was a bad idea, but something inside me needed to know what was happening. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown or the hope that I could help someone in need. Either way, I found myself moving towards the staircase. The stairs were old and rickety, each step groaning under my weight. I took them slowly, the creaks and groans echoing in the silence. As I climbed, the noises grew louder and more unsettling. The crying seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The voices whispered urgently, their words still unclear but filled with a haunting intensity. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit and lined with closed doors. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. My heart was racing, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Despite the fear gripping me, I forced myself to take a step forward. Drawn by the mystery and the strange pull of the abandoned motel, I stopped in front of a room with the door slightly ajar. The strange, unsettling noises were louder here. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and the walls were covered with old photographs and bizarre drawings. The images were disturbing, people with hollow eyes and twisted smiles and dark, shadowy figures lurking in the backgrounds of the pictures. The drawings were just as eerie, filled with strange symbols and unsettling scenes. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. My heart jumped into my throat and I spun around, rushing to the door. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. Then, I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer. I looked around desperately for a place to hide. I quickly ducked under the bed, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps grew louder, and I saw shadows moving under the door. The door creaked open, and I saw feet moving around the room. There were multiple people, and they were speaking in low, hushed tones that I couldn't understand. The voices were filled with a strange, almost ritualistic intensity. Through the gap under the bed, I watched their feet move around the room. One of them stopped right next to the bed, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. My muscles were tense, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. The seconds felt like hours as I waited, terrified of being discovered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they left the room, the door closing softly behind them. I waited until the footsteps faded into the distance before daring to move. My whole body was shaking as I crawled out from under the bed. I tiptoed to the door and tried the handle again, but it was still locked. My eyes darted around the room, looking for another way out. Then, I noticed a window that wasn't boarded up. Desperation gave me strength. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass. The window shattered, and I felt a sharp pain as shards of glass cut into my hands. Ignoring the pain, I climbed through the window, careful to avoid more broken glass. Once outside, I didn't stop to look back. I ran as fast as I could. I just wanted to get as far away from that motel as possible. I stumbled back to my car, my heart pounding and my hands bleeding from the cuts. Every step felt like a mile. When I finally reached my car, I jumped in and locked the doors, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I frantically tried to start the engine, turning the key again and again. For a moment, I feared the car wouldn't start, leaving me stranded in that nightmare. After a few agonizing tries, the engine finally roared to life. I didn't waste any time. I floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the motel as fast as I could. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. My mind was racing, replaying the horrors I had just experienced. The shadowy figures, the eerie drawings, the slamming door. It all felt like a terrible dream, but the pain in my hands reminded me it was all too real. The experience left me shaken for weeks. I couldn't get the images and sounds out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow eyes and twisted smiles from the photographs, heard the faint crying and hushed voices. I found it hard to sleep, and every little noise made me jump. The creak of a floorboard, the whisper of the wind, everything reminded me of that night. I decided to quit my job as a delivery driver. I couldn't handle the thought of another night like that. The fear had seeped into my bones, and I knew I needed a change. Months later, I moved to a new town, hoping for a fresh start. The memory of that night still haunted me, but I tried to use it as motivation. I became more cautious and aware of my surroundings, always looking over my shoulder. I started working at a community center, helping others who had experienced trauma and fear. It was therapeutic, giving me a sense of purpose and a way to channel my own experiences. The abandoned motel became a local legend, with rumors of strange occurrences and haunted rooms spreading through the town. I never spoke about my experience to anyone, but I knew what I had seen and heard. The terror of that night changed me forever. It made me more resilient and determined to protect myself and others from the horrors that lurk in the shadows. I learned to face my fears and use them as strength, turning a night of terror into a life of purpose. The memory of that abandoned motel would always be with me, a dark chapter in my life that shaped who I had become. It was a cold, foggy evening in our small suburban town. The streets were empty, and the only light came from the streetlights flickering on and off. I was driving my old beat-up car, feeling the chill of the night even inside. The dim glow of my GPS was the only thing lighting up my worried face. It was my last delivery of the night, and I just wanted to get it over with. Earlier, I had received an unusual order through the online app. It was a large quantity of food, including some really rare and obscure items that I had never seen anyone order before. The delivery was requested to this new suburb of the city, which I had never delivered to. Something about the order seemed strange, but I shrugged it off as just another quirky customer. I drove into a new neighborhood, but something felt off. The houses were modern, but they were eerily lifeless. Most of the windows were boarded up, and for sale signs were everywhere. It felt like a ghost town, and I could feel my heart pounding harder with each passing second. Finally, I reached the address. It was a large, newly built house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The house stood alone, and it looked like no one had ever lived there. There were no lights on inside, except for a dim porch light that flickered every few seconds. The silence around me was unsettling, making my skin crawl. I parked my car and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I grabbed the food and walked to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Leave the food at the door and wait for further instructions," it said. I did as I was told, leaving the food on the doorstep and stepping back. Moments later, another message came through. "Check the mailbox for your tip. it read. I walked over to the mailbox, my hands trembling. Inside, I found an envelope with a large sum of cash and a note that said, "Thank you, now come inside." I stared at the house, feeling scared and intrigued at the same time. Against my better judgment, I felt a pull to go inside. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly in the quiet night. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. My heart raced as I stood there, alone in the dark, wondering what I had just walked into. I tried to call out, "Hello?" but my voice sounded small and scared. There was no answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. The hallway was long and dark, leading to a faintly lit dining room at the end. As I walked, I could hear my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The air was cold and smelled faintly of something rotten. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself to keep warm. I tried to call the customer again, hoping to get some kind of explanation for this strange situation. The phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. I hung up and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Maybe the customer was just playing a weird prank. Maybe this was all some kind of joke. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The silence of the house, the strange order, the unsettling feeling in my gut. It all pointed to something bad. As I reached the dining room, I saw a beautifully set table in the center of the room. There were plates, silverware, and glasses all arranged neatly, but the food on the table was old and rotting. The smell was almost unbearable. I covered my nose with my sleeve, trying not to gag. On one side of the table was a single empty chair. The other chairs were pushed back, as if people had gotten up and left in a hurry. I looked around the room, trying to find any sign of the customer. The walls were covered with photographs, all of them showing different delivery drivers. Their faces were filled with fear and panic. My heart started pounding as I realized that these were real people who had been here before me. I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, but the door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a loud bang. I jumped, my heart pounding even harder. I tried the door, but it was locked. I was trapped. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but no one answered. The house seemed to swallow my cries, leaving me in silence once again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out, hoping it was the customer finally explaining what was going on. But it was another text message. "Check the mailbox for your tip." This was weird. I had the sense of reliving the moment before, and somehow I just went along with it. I hesitated, but I knew I had to follow the instructions if I wanted to get out of there. I made my way back to the front of the house, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty hallways. The mailbox was outside, right next to the front door. I opened it and found an envelope with a large sum of cash inside. My hands trembled as I pulled out a note that said, "Thank you. Now come inside again." I took a deep breath and pushed the front door open again and stepped back inside, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. The hallway was still dark, the dining room at the end still faintly lit. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing once again. The silence was almost deafening. As I reached the dining room, I saw that the chair that had been empty before was now occupied. A man sat there, his back to me. He was hunched over the table, his hands resting on the old rotting food. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The man didn't move. He just sat there, silent and still. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Excuse me, I'm the delivery driver. I brought your food." The man slowly turned his head to look at me. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. He stared at me with a blank expression, as if he didn't even see me. Fear surged through me, and I took a step back. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to go." The man suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He took a step toward me and I backed away. "Please," I said. "I just want to leave." He didn't say anything, just kept walking toward me. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. I reached the front door and pulled on the handle, but this time it wouldn't budge. I was trapped again. My phone buzzed again, and I pulled it out with shaking hands. Another text message. "You're not going anywhere." I looked around desperately for another way out. There was a window at the end of the hallway, and I ran toward it, hoping it would be unlocked. I reached it and tried to open it, but it was stuck. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see the man standing in the hallway watching me, his blank, hollow eyes creeping me right out. Not knowing what to do, I dashed into an upstairs bedroom, looking for a place to hide. I spotted a small crawl space in the corner and squeezed myself inside, trying to calm my ragged breathing. The space was cramped and dusty, but it was my only hope. Suddenly, I could hear a group of people. They were searching the house for me, their ominous whispers echoing through the walls. My fear reached its peak as one of them entered the bedroom. I held my breath, my heart beating so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The footsteps grew closer and closer until they paused right outside my hiding spot. I could see their shadow through the crack in the crawl space door. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, then finally moved away. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to find a way out. I remembered the old landline phone I had seen in the hallway earlier. It was my only chance. I waited until the footsteps faded, then quietly crawled out of my hiding spot. I made my way back downstairs, every creak of the floorboards making me jump. I reached the phone, rushed over, and picked up the receiver, my hands trembling. I dialed 911 and whispered into the phone. "Help! I'm at 123 Crame Avenue. I'm in danger. Please hurry." Just as I finished the call, the group appeared at the end of the hallway. They had found me. I dropped the phone and backed away, my heart racing. They moved toward me, their faces hidden in the shadows. I grabbed a nearby broom, holding it out in front of me like a weapon. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The group paused, then advanced again. I swung the broom wildly, trying to keep them at bay. It was a tense standoff. They circled around me and I swung the broom again, hitting one of them in the arm. They backed off for a moment, but then one of them lunged at me. I swung the broom as hard as I could, hitting them in the side. They stumbled back and I took the chance to move closer to the phone. I grabbed it and swung it around, using the cord as a makeshift whip. I managed to keep them at bay, but I knew I couldn't hold them off forever. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I heard sirens in the distance. The group hesitated, then started to back away. The sirens grew louder, and I could see flashing lights through the windows. The police had arrived. The group scattered, running up the stairs and out of the house. I dropped the phone and collapsed to the floor, tears of relief streaming down my face. The police burst into the house moments later, and I was finally safe. They took my statement and searched the house, finding the evidence of the group's crimes. I was shaken but unharmed, grateful to be alive. The experience left me more cautious and aware, but I knew I had to share my story to warn others. As I stood outside the house watching the police work, I knew I would never forget that night. It had changed me forever, but it had also made me stronger. I was a survivor, and I would make sure no one else had to go through what I did.